You pay to move water inside your home. You pay again when it leaves. You pay for the energy that pushes it through pipes. You pay monthly, forever, because water needs constant force to reach you. That wasn't true for most of human history. For thousands of years, water moved itself, not through innovation or cleverness, through gravity, soil, and time. Cities ran on it. Farms depended on it. Civilizations organized entire economies around water that required no operation, no fuel, no monthly bill. The system worked because it needed nothing from you once it was built. This wasn't primitive. It was structural superiority, and we didn't abandon it because it failed. We abandoned it because it worked without anyone being able to charge for it. Here's where it gets strange. The oldest water systems still functioning today don't use pumps. In Iran, 3,000-year-old tunnels still deliver water to villages. No electricity, no maintenance crews, just slope, stone, and darkness. The water travels underground for miles, protected from heat, losing almost nothing to evaporation. It arrives exactly where it's needed, because that's what gravity does when you don't interrupt it. If you like seeing systems most people call ancient actually be permanent, subscribe now. This channel is built to show you what got buried under business models. Those tunnels are called qanats. They weren't genius. They were the baseline. Across Persia, North Africa, and Central Asia, entire cities were fed by water that moved itself through carefully angled underground channels. The engineering wasn't in forcing the water, it was in never needing to. The water came from mountain aquifers. It traveled downhill through stone tunnels, sometimes for 30 miles. The gradient was minimal, maybe 1 foot per thousand. Slow, steady, continuous. No one operated it, no one turned it on. It just moved, year after year, century after century, because the earth tilted that direction and water obeys physics. The Romans are famous for aqueducts, but that's not where their water intelligence was. Most of Roman water infrastructure was underground. Cisterns, infiltration channels, reservoirs built in series, each one slightly lower than the last. The water moved by itself from mountains to cities. No pressure required. What people saw above ground was theater. What kept 1 million people alive was buried. But here's the part no one mentions. The Romans didn't just move water. They returned it. Excess from the cities didn't get thrown away. It flowed into agricultural fields outside the walls, recharging the soil, feeding crops, then filtering back into rivers clean. The water circulated. It wasn't consumed. It was borrowed. That's the logic that died. In medieval Europe, every village had a commons, a shared spring, a retention pond, a mill stream, water-powered grain mills, lumber saws, textile workshops, but it wasn't used up. After turning the wheel, it kept moving downstream to the next mill, the next town, the next field. Water was flow. You could use it, but you couldn't own it, because it never stopped. China took this further. Rice terraces that are over 1,000 years old still function in Yunnan and Guizhou. Water enters at the top, passes through hundreds of fields in sequence, fertilizes the soil naturally, and exits cleaner than it arrived. No treatment plants, no chemical filters. The system cleans itself because living soil does that when water moves slowly through it. The water wasn't controlled by force. It was controlled by time. That's what every ancient system understood. Water doesn't need to be fast. It needs to be patient. When it moves too quickly, it erodes. When it's held too long, it stagnates. But when it flows at the speed the ground can absorb it, it does something modern infrastructure can't. It recharges itself. Then we made a decision. Between the 1800s and 1900s, cities exploded in size. More people, more buildings, more pavement. Rain that used to soak into soil now pooled on streets. Flooding became a constant problem. So engineers did what seemed rational. Move the water away as fast as possible. Rivers were channeled. Streams were buried. Wetlands were drained. The goal was speed. Get the water off the surface, into pipes, into rivers, into the ocean, before it caused damage. It worked. Flooding decreased in the short term. But here's what also happened. The water stopped infiltrating. Aquifers stopped refilling. Springs dried up. Wells went deeper every decade. Cities that once had natural water began depending entirely on distant sources, pumped in electrically, delivered under pressure, metered, billed. The water didn't disappear. We just stopped letting it stay. At the same time, pumps and pressurized pipes became standard. Before that, most urban water was gravity-fed from elevated tanks or nearby hills. You didn't need energy to drink. Now, water only moves if electricity moves it. If the grid fails, the water stops. That's new. That's fragile, and it's not fragile by accident. Fragility is profitable. A system that runs itself can't be sold monthly. Water that infiltrates naturally doesn't pass through a meter. Gravity doesn't send invoices. So the systems that worked for free were replaced with systems that require continuous payment, not because the new ones perform better, because they generate revenue. Comment where you're watching from, because some places still have springs that never stopped running, while others depend entirely on pumps now. This isn't conspiracy, it's just economics. If you're building infrastructure in the 20th century, and your options are build something once that works forever for free, or build something that requires energy, maintenance, and monthly billing. Which one gets funding? Which one employs people long-term? Which one integrates into a grid you can control and monetize? The second one, every time. So infiltration became loss. Water that stayed in the ground became wasted. Systems that required no operation became inefficient. The language changed before the infrastructure did. Once people accepted that water needed to move fast and be controlled centrally, the old systems looked primitive, even when they outperformed the new ones. But the physics didn't change. Water still wants to sink into soil. It still moves downhill without help. It still cleans itself when it flows through living earth. We just stopped designing for that. We designed for speed, control, and continuous dependency instead. You see the results now. Cities flood more violently than ever because water has nowhere to infiltrate. Aquifers drop every year because rain runs straight into storm drains and out to the ocean. People in places that used to have natural springs now depend entirely on electricity to move water from hundreds of miles away. When the power goes out, the water stops. When the ancient systems were built, power outages didn't exist as a concept. What's insane is that the old infrastructure is still there in some places, still working. In parts of Iran, qanats still deliver water to towns that never stopped using them. In Spain, ancient acequias still irrigate farms using medieval water-sharing laws. In Japan, some rice terraces are over 400 years old and have never needed repair because water moving slowly doesn't erode. These aren't museums. They're systems that outlasted empires. During World War II, when European cities were bombed and electrical grids collapsed, the neighborhoods that survived best were the ones with old gravity-fed water systems and natural springs. When modern infrastructure failed, the ancient baseline reappeared, not as nostalgia, as the only thing still functioning. The same thing happens in every major drought. When reservoirs empty and pumps can't pull from deeper aquifers. The communities that still use infiltration basins and slow-moving channels have water longer than the ones dependent on pressure and electricity. The system that looks outdated in abundance becomes the only one that works in scarcity. That's not luck. That's what happens when you build for permanence instead of profit. Here's the parallel you need to see. Perennial crops were called invasive when they didn't need replanting. Water that couldn't be metered was called waste when it stayed in the ground. The pattern is identical. Anything that creates autonomy gets redefined as inefficiency, not because it performs worse, because it can't be sold continuously. If your infrastructure doesn't require you to pay someone every month, it's a threat to a business model. So the business model redefines the infrastructure as obsolete, even when it's objectively more resilient. You're not paying for water. You're paying for the decision to make water require payment. Right now, if you want to move toward how water used to work, you don't need permission. You need surface area and patience. Rain gardens, swales, berms, infiltration basins. These aren't inventions. They're just letting water slow down instead of rushing it away. The water does the rest. On a small scale, this works immediately. Divert roof runoff into planted depressions instead of storm drains. The water soaks in. Plants filter it. Your soil holds moisture longer. You're not inventing a system. You're stopping the interruption of one. On a larger scale, it requires rethinking drainage. Right now, cities are built to move water away fast. Reversing that means designing for absorption, permeable pavement, green roofs, detention ponds that release slowly. Some cities are already doing this, not as environmentalism, but as infrastructure cost reduction. Letting water infiltrate is cheaper than building bigger. Storm drains. There are limits. You can't flood a basement to prove a point. You can't ignore genuine flood risk in low-lying areas. But most modern drainage is over-engineered for speed when the actual need is time. Slowing water down by even 20% can cut flood peaks in half while recharging aquifers that took decades to deplete. The constraint isn't technical. It's conceptual. We're still thinking in terms of control and speed when the question is whether we need to control it at all. The water never stopped knowing how to move itself. We just built a world that intercepts it at every step and charges rent for the interruption. The next vault is already open.